Hi there. Cuba is a model for the world to follow. Ever since embracing socialism in the aftermath of the 1959 victory over the Batista regime, Cuba has been striving endlessly to uphold a political, social, and economic structure designed to enfranchise the working masses as well as all disenfranchised people. Even after dealing with the hardship that came from the special period after losing one of their biggest trading partners in the Soviet Union, Cuba would bounce back and flourish as one of the most successful examples of actually existing socialism. Seeing as it's been 65 years since the victory of the Cuban revolutionaries, let's take a look at 10 achievements of socialism in Cuba, in no particular order. Very quickly though, before we begin, I just wanted to remind everybody watching that if you enjoy this video, it's extremely appreciated if you like the video, subscribe, and share my content. I also have a Buy Me a Coffee page where if you have the means to and you would like to, you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Thank you and enjoy the video. Number 10. Environmentalism in Cuba. Generally speaking, socialist countries and countries striving for socialism have taken the most effective actions in their environmental efforts, battling climate change, and similar endeavors. This is of course because socialist societies operate in a manner designed for the actual improvement of people's lives and the world itself, rather than the maximizing of profit by any means. These are only two of many examples of Cuba's endeavors to create a cleaner and greener planet for the people, not for profit. In 2019, the Cuban government introduced reforms to the country's fishing laws as a method of protecting marine ecosystems, oceans, rivers, and lakes. These efforts were commended by environmentalists as a significant effort to preserve coral reefs and the populations of various aquatic creatures. That same year, one of the cooperatives in Cuba, the A3 cooperative specifically, utilized a creative way of managing the influx of plastic pollution throughout the world. This cooperative has collected and recycled plastic waste to create plastic lumber for use in things including park benches and garbage cans. Number 9. Defeating illiteracy. When you look at literacy rates by country, Cuba outranks the United States. Cuba is ranked number 21 in the world for literacy, and the United States is ranked number 51 in the world. In fact, only 79% of people living in the United States have a medium to high level of literacy, leaving many bordering on illiterate due to many factors typically connecting back to capitalism and the education system. Education and literacy have been at the forefront of the Cuban Revolution since the early days of their socialist experiment. Through the efforts of volunteer literacy brigades created as a part of socialist construction, it took less than 3 years since Cuba's becoming a socialist republic for illiteracy to effectively be eradicated from the island. Since then, illiteracy has been virtually unknown in Cuba while continuing to be fought through the Yes I Can initiative. These tactics for constructing literacy are even so popular that several other countries have adopted this initiative, including Brazil, Nigeria, Uruguay, and several others. Number 8. Women's enfranchisement. From Mao Zedong to Thomas Sankara, the uplifting and enfranchisement of women is of the utmost importance in any instance of socialist construction. The Communist Party of Cuba's official newspaper recently released an article condemning violence against women and a gendered hierarchy, citing the need to continue to fight against any instances of gendered violence and to learn more about how to implement strategies that will eliminate these reactionary tendencies. In the realm of official politics, the parliamentary system in Cuba is only one of a few that boasts having one of the highest, if not the highest number of women in their National Assembly. In early 2018, the country was on the cusp of seeing over 300 women nominated for the Cuban National Assembly. In a 2019 article from the World Economic Forum, it was reported that in Cuba, 53.2% of those making up assembly members were women. This is another example of Cuba outperforming the United States, with the same article stating that in early 2019, only 23.5% of people in the US Congress were women. Number 7. Solidarity with Palestine. The struggle in Palestine against the genocidal, colonialist, apartheid state of Israel has in recent times seen a global surge of support. For many, the onslaught of bombings and other acts of violence perpetuated by the Israeli government has awakened them to the positions of anti-imperialism and for many positions in line with international socialism. For Cuba, their support for the Palestinian cause of self-determination and independence has been a constant for decades. Cuba was one of the first countries to recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization in 1964, and Fidel Castro was a close ally of Yasser Arafat. Just under 1 month before October 7th of 2023, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel reaffirmed the country's support for Palestine in a meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Diaz-Canel would additionally express Cuba's solidarity with Palestine by taking part in a massive march through Havana, with this march being joined by Palestinian medical students studying in Cuba. And you know what? While we're at it, free Palestine. Number 6. Internationalism. An expansion of Cuba's established solidarity with the Palestinian freedom struggle, Cuba has historically embraced internationalism and provided meaningful support and assistance to numerous countries, both socialist and not, while also embracing meaningful forms of aid from other countries. For example, after the Bahamas were hit by Hurricane Dorian in 2019, Cuba emphasized that they were going to send numerous doctors and teachers to the Bahamas to assist in providing emergency relief, and these teachers and medical professionals would be staying for some time after to help in rebuilding the medical and education apparatus in the areas that were most affected by the hurricane. As a part of a bigger issue that will later be given its own entry, in 2020, Cuba would send a number of doctors to Italy to help in the fight against COVID-19 to great effect. In terms of embracing help from other countries, in 2019, Vietnam emphasized its appreciation for their relationship with Cuba, highlighted by their joint effort to support Cuba in developing rice production and increasing rice productivity in Cuba. Number 5. Fighting COVID-19. This is something that might warrant its own video in the future, but I wanted to at least mention a couple other examples of how Cuba proactively engaged in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic on the socialist path, especially when you compare it to the absolute dumpster fire of how the United States took on the pandemic. In the very early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Cuban government quickly approved the use of the antiviral drug interferon alpha-2b for use as a means of treating COVID infections. The drug is routinely used to combat dengue fever. Cuba also continued to send doctors and other medical professionals throughout the world to help combat the global pandemic while also fighting for the health of their own people. Cuba would also construct their own domestically made ventilators for those fighting COVID infections, and would additionally be the first country in Latin America to produce their own COVID vaccines, as well as engage in mass vaccination campaigns against the virus. Number 4. Commitment to healthcare. Cuban medicine is considered by most to be some of the greatest that the world has to offer. Once more, to go through every achievement of the socialist healthcare system in Cuba would require its own dedicated video to give a more thorough appreciation to the advancements of medicine brought about by socialism in Cuba. So again, here are just a few examples of socialist Cuba's commitment to healthcare for the people. In 2015, Cuba was the first country to ever eliminate mother-to-baby transmission of HIV and syphilis, with the fight against STDs also including the free distribution of anti-HIV drug PrEP in a pilot program back in 2019. Cuba also has one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world, with only 5 deaths occurring out of every 1,000 live births as of 2019. And finally, Cuba has a fucking lung cancer vaccine that people in the United States have been trying to get a hold of. Number 3. LGBTQ+ advancement. Man, a lot of these entries are worthy of their own video, or even multiple videos. And the advancement of LGBTQ+ people in Cuba is a topic that's going to see a series of videos in the future. That being said, here's a very brief synopsis of the whole issue of LGBTQ+ folks in Cuba from the revolution onward. In the early days of the revolution, while still in some ways better than other countries in that they weren't straight up executing them, Cuba maintained a generally reactionary attitude towards gay folks, using gay as an umbrella term. Things such as the UMAPs of the 60s and the Mariel boat lift in the 1980s showed a not necessarily dehumanizing, but a very flawed approach to the idea of homosexuality. This is largely a result of the lingering influence of Catholicism and colonialist ideology left over from the pre-revolutionary period. Over the last 20 to 30 years or so, though, gay folks have seen several major advancements in Cuba, including the observing of the International Day Against Homophobia, enshrining transgender healthcare into their socialist healthcare system, and the introduction of both the constitutional prohibition of discrimination based on sex and gender identity in 2019, as well as a new family code passed between late 2022 and early 2023. Number 2. Agrarian reform. When the revolutionaries finally defeated the reactionary US-backed forces of the Fulgencio Batista regime, one of the first efforts taken was to enact agrarian reform so that the land in Cuba was being used for the betterment of the people, rather than for the construction of more casinos, brothels, and other generally unsavory businesses. With the creation of the National Institute of Agrarian Reform, or INRA, several initiatives within this reform established important infrastructure for the development of the Cuban economy and the Cuban people. Such actions taken by the INRA include the division of 75,000 acres of land previously owned by American companies, the construction of roads and schools in rural areas of the island, and building hospitals providing adequate health care for the Cuban peasantry. Number 1. A commitment to socialism. Ever since Cuba established itself as a revolutionary socialist country, the construction of socialism with the goal of communism against capitalist hegemony has been enshrined into the economic, political, and social fabric of the country. With the draft constitution debates in 2018, communism as an aspiration for all was unanimously ratified as a part of the Constitution. Upon his election to presidency, Miguel Diaz-Canel assured that there would be no capitalist restoration anytime soon in Cuba. And finally, on several occasions, Raul Castro has exclaimed that Cuba will continue to defend and build socialism. To quote, "We defend socialism, a system that the government of the United States disdains because we believe in social justice, in balanced and sustainable development, with fair distribution of wealth and guarantees of quality services for the entire population. We practice solidarity and reject self-interest. We share not what we have left over, but even what we lack. We repudiate all forms of social discrimination and fight organized crime, drug trafficking, terrorism, trafficking in persons, and all forms of slavery. We defend the human rights of all citizens, not of exclusive and privileged segments. We believe in the democracy of the people and not in the political and undemocratic power of capital. We seek to promote the prosperity of the homeland, in harmony with nature and caring for the resources on which life on the planet depends, and because we are convinced that a better world is possible." The Cuban Revolution is a powerful example of the successes of socialism in the face of imperialism, and should be celebrated as such. For 65 years, socialist Cuba has proven to be one of the leading forces in the advancement of healthcare, housing, and dozens upon dozens of other issues that the Cuban people have faced since breaking out from under the thumb of Western colonialism. Cuba is just one of many examples of the successes of actually existing socialism. My name is Jymee. Thank you for watching.